Hello and welcome to module number 14 of Life Beyond the Ego's Mask program with myself, Paul Ryder. Module 14. Are you addicted? Now, if you've been listening all the way through, you know what I'm going to say, but for anybody out there who this is the first module you're listening to, or you skipped ahead by missing other modules, or maybe one of your friends said just listen to this particular module because it might be relevant to you, then irrespective of what anybody has said to you, you have to stop and go right back to module 1 and listen to the entire program in order. And yes, I'm fully aware that there are many hours in the earlier modules to listen to, but it really is vital to go through all of the modules in order. And the reason for that, especially with this module now, is that we are on a very sensitive topic here. This is about addictions. And addictions can destroy lives. And especially as we started to look at in the prior module, Discover the Con, anything in our lives which can be a mask can be an addiction. And let me say it again, addictions can destroy lives. Now, initially, when most people hear the word addiction, they immediately think of an alcoholic or a drug addict taking cocaine or heroin. But those addictions are just one of thousands of things that people can become addicted to. And keep in mind, emotionally manipulative behaviour hides in plain sight. And as we started to look at through the rest of this program, your protector self might be suppressing your conscious mind, getting you to focus on your mask. Thereby, you could become addicted to your own mask. And let me say again, addictions can sometimes destroy lives. Now, I want to share with you a very profound statement that somebody I was working with many years ago who was overcoming drug addiction himself. He said, the mind doesn't recognize the drug, it recognizes the feeling. And remember, the protector self will always move away from what it sees as pain and toward that which it sees as gratification. So we could take, for example, a person who is experiencing -10 on the periodization scale. They are extremely shut down, overwhelmed with depression, constant anxiety thoughts, constant internal paranoia. Their body is exhausted, say for example through physical stress hormones, and then they might turn to alcohol or a narcotic drug. And in that state where they may feel inebriated from the narcotic, it may in their perception feel like a break of their state of -10. So in their perception it might take them up to a -5 or a -3. Or in their perception even into the plus sections. Remember, a removal of pain is always seen as gratification. Now, before we start this program, I want to draw your attention to something that I've been putting in the program so far in relation to my father. And like I say, everything that I'm sharing in this program has a purpose for being there. And I've been giving something a particular wording structure so we can go into it and reverse it when we get to this particular module. Now, I have a question for you here. So all the way through this program so far, I've been saying my father was an alcoholic. Okay, so keep that phrase in mind. My father was an alcoholic. Or even to remove me from that particular statement, so it's a standalone statement about my father as an individual. So my father's name was Tony. So if I was to say Tony was an alcoholic. But then I want to give you a different angle. What is the difference between saying Tony was an alcoholic and Tony was alcohol codependent? So let me share that again. What is the difference between saying Tony was an alcoholic and Tony was alcohol codependent? Now, if it hasn't come to your mind straight away, because it is directly relating to something that we've covered a lot through this program already, Tony was an alcoholic and Tony was alcohol codependent, because there is a big difference, and it is directly relating to something that we've been covering all the way through this program. But like a lot of things, sometimes things are not as easy to see if you don't know what you're looking for. So if when you heard both of those statements, Tony was an alcoholic or Tony was alcohol codependent, if nothing came through to your mind straight away that there is a difference between those two statements, what I would like to do, and it is very relevant to yourself in regards to this particular module, I'd like you to stop the training, write both of those statements down, really reflect on what is the difference between those two statements. Number one, Tony was an alcoholic. And number two, Tony was alcohol codependent. Stop the training now, write it down. There is a reason why those two statements are very different. And to add in there, one of those statements is extremely destructive. Stop the training, reflect on that, and then we'll come back and I'll explain it through. Okay, so welcome back. And to say as well, I really do hope you stop the training. That's if it didn't come to your mind straight away of what the difference was between those two statements. Because again, relating to the last module, when I was sharing about the film Revolver, and sometimes it can have very poor reviews. Very often it's when people do not understand something and it's going to require a lot of extra energy, that we can just wait for somebody else to tell us the answer. Because we want that quick fix. We don't want to put the effort in sometimes, because it's just easier to go with what's easier. But if you did stop the training and nothing maybe came through, I'm going to explain the difference between those two statements, and you're going to see how subtle the difference between these two statements are. And sometimes, without even realizing it, we as people can add things into our conversation that we do not realize, can sometimes be having a very harsh judgment of other people's actions and behavior. So the difference is, we looked at those two statements. Tony was an alcoholic, or Tony was alcohol codependent. If we go back to shame and guilt, remember, when we look at shame, a shame-based statement will say that you are stupid, you are worthless, you are an idiot, you are an alcoholic. So to say the statement, Tony was an alcoholic, is actually, and most people don't realize they're doing this, so no judgment because I said it for years as well, that to say my dad was an alcoholic is actually shaming him. Because if we look at the other statement, Tony was alcohol codependent, what we are then saying is that Tony's behavior was alcohol codependent. So this is then an observation of his behavior on the outer circles, what I do. Let's just go over that again. To say the statement, Tony was an alcoholic, is saying that he himself, as an individual, as that centre circle, is an alcoholic. But if we say that Tony was alcohol codependent, we are then saying it's his behaviour that is linked to the alcohol. And as we all know, we can change our behaviour. And over the years, when I've been working through with people who have been addicted to alcohol or drugs, remember these are just a couple of many, many masks, they have very often referred themselves to that I am an alcoholic, I am a drug addict. And without knowing it, they are actually shaming themselves. But then to amplify that and use myself as a template, Many years ago, I had a job role as a fitness manager in a health club, but I would always describe myself that I was a fitness manager. I was a personal trainer, but actually I was Paul who was employed as a fitness manager. I was Paul who was employed as a personal trainer. Now, with what I've just shared there about the I statement and what I do statements, to many people when I've been doing talks in, say, workshops or keynote talks, it can appear a little bit confusing at the start. But what I'm talking about here is definitely related to overcoming addiction. Because if we take it back again to my dad, if he was to say to himself that he was an alcoholic, he's saying basically that the very fundamental essence of who he is an alcoholic. But he's not. He was a human being with lots of different options in life. But to cover up his depression and the best option he thought best for him at that time, even though it wasn't because it took his life, he thought that alcohol was the best option. And for a more visual image of this within your mind, imagine that your behaviours are like clothing. You can swap and change and try on different clothes. But if it's you as a human being in that centre circle, that is who you are for the rest of your life. And remember, it's just pure potential. Just like that 5 litres of water. So my dad was not an alcoholic. My dad had alcohol codependent behaviour. Now obviously all the way through this program I have been using the phrase my dad was an alcoholic. And although that is technically wrong because that is a shame-based statement about an individual, the reason that I have been saying that over and over again is because when we got to this particular module, I was going to switch it around. And as I hope you're getting used to now, everything about this program, Life Beyond the Ego's Mask, is we might be looking at one thing, and then it could suddenly change and be something completely different. Taking us back to module number 3, are things as they appear. Always keep in mind, especially through this module, question everything. Now just to add in before we start the rest of this module, if what I've just shared there does seem a little bit confusing in some way, maybe stop the training, reflect on it, ask yourself if it doesn't make sense at this moment in time, why may I have introduced that? Remember, just because we cannot see something at the moment doesn't mean it's not there. And to give you some perspective here, I've been studying this area of mental health for about 33 years now. And understanding these areas can sometimes take a lot of self-reflection time. So if you do want to stop the training and go over it, write any notes down of what I've just shared there, because remember, it is relevant to you in regards to any masks or addictions that you may have in your own life, then just stop the training, go over it, and then come back. All the way through this module, I want you to keep this one phrase in mind. Addictions are painkillers. Addictions are painkillers. And one more time for good measure. Addictions are painkillers. So bringing everything together that we've been going through in this program so far. The self-esteem recovery model, we have that trauma at stage 3. The protector self to cover up that deeper anxiety and physical stress creates a mask at stage 6. The mask, or the con that we can be manipulated with, the mask is therefore to cover up the deeper trauma at stage 3. Also the phrase that a removal of pain means gratification. So therefore, when the mask distracts a person away from their pain, that will be seen as gratification. Now, if the mind is experiencing at stage 3 a trauma of shame, and as we know, that is a belief that I am not enough, But also we now know that that can never be proven because we can only ever be judged on what we do, not who we are, as we saw with that 5 litres of water. And then bringing it together with what we discussed in the last module, anything in our lives can become a mask, and they can also hide in plain sight. A person could exercise on a regular basis, and it could be because it's their true self, but it could also be because they're hiding a wounded self-image, and the exercise gives them an identity. It could be a person working long hours to achieve a goal that they've set for their entire life. Or they could be working to prove to other people that they are good enough because they have the right work ethic. Then back to the story of sugar and salt. How two things that can be completely different can appear as the exact same thing. And this is why so many people get caught up in addictions. And again, it's not just alcohol or narcotic drugs. Anything can be an addiction. A removal of pain is gratification. Therefore, if a mask removes pain by distraction, then it will be seen as gratification. We then become addicted to the mask, and therefore that mask becomes a painkiller. So if a person's protector self does not feel it can cope with stage 3 of the self-esteem recovery model trauma, it might become addicted to their mask and protect that mask at all costs because it sees it as a painkiller. And as I've said all the way through this program, when we're going into these kind of things, the protector self might sometimes screen out information because it thinks it's keeping you safe. And obviously in the last module we've been talking about all the things that could be masks. And in this module we're talking about could you be addicted to any of your masks? Which means, as we've been talking through, it requires that we take that responsibility to see reality as it is. If we have a deeper underlying trauma and then we are distracting ourselves with our masks, the protector self may be screening out anything that could potentially shine light on that mask, again thinking it's keeping you safe. Which is why making notes is absolutely vital. So keep in mind all the way through this module and further modules that phrase, addictions are painkillers. But also we could take that a level deeper now and change it to masks are painkillers. And anything we are addicted to means that we are a prisoner trapped in our conditioned self. And yes, facing the truth and understanding that deeper trauma can require time and very sensitive work and step-by-step approach. It's not just a simple case of running into it. If you recall right at the very start of this program, I mentioned about running into any anxiety with guns blazing won't get anybody anywhere. And this is what I mean. There is so much more to overcoming masks and addictions and shame and guilt than might appear when we first look at it. So always keep in mind, and this might not be the nicest thing to hear, and I always recommend taking things step by step. But if a person is addicted to their mask and is refusing to let it go because of that deeper underlying trauma, then they will always be locked into their conditioned self. Now that isn't to say that everybody has to go out there and let go of their masks. It is each individual's choice. It is each individual's life. And I've met people over the years who are living in their mask and don't want to face that deeper underlying trauma. And as long as they do not place themselves in situations that could trigger a deeper trauma, they can actually live quite a peaceful life, again, as long as that trauma is not triggered. But it is always the individual's choice. So as I'm going through this module and any other modules where I may say about you could be locked into your conditioned self or it is a person's responsibility to face trauma, I just want to make you aware that no part of this program is ever going to tell you what you should or should not do. All I can offer here is an awareness of what may be going on for a person, and then it is their responsibility to listen to that, interpret it how they choose, and then make a decision about their life with that information that they have. And as I mentioned in an earlier module, if any author, trainer, coach, or therapist on an audiobook or a video where they are not working with you one-to-one ever tells you what you should or should not do in regards to your mental health, I would be highly cautious of that advice, because there are so many variables in a person's life, and nobody can know what a person's going through just by teaching them through an audiobook or a training video. And the reason I'm keep repeating this all the way through is because, especially in this module, Are You Addicted?, the full range of masks that a person could become addicted to, thereby covering up a deeper trauma, could require very detailed and step-by-step intervention. Keep in mind, your life is your life. Nobody else can tell you what you should or should not do. It is always your responsibility, and as such, it is always your choice. Now, any addiction that a person develops in relation to their mask will be linked to their pain gratification cycle. Remember, a removal of pain is seen as gratification. So we have the pain at stage 3, and then it's covered up by mask at stage 6. The person here will either knowingly or unknowingly be subscribing to the addiction of their mask because they feel, even subconsciously or even consciously, that it alleviates some form of discomfort or pain. This pain is and can only ever be experienced physically or emotionally. And remember, it is how we interpret our world, which means it's not necessarily what's really happening, but it's how we feel about what's really happening. Now, just to add in again, this is why it's essential to have gone through all the prior modules, because there is a lot that we've been going over in prior modules that is very relevant to this very sensitive module. However, and I will definitely write this down because this is very important in regards to addiction. In reality, in regards to what we can see, hear, taste, touch and smell, it is not the drug or the mask itself that that person is addicted to. What that person is really addicted to is the gratification feeling it creates for them. It is the feeling of gratification by the apparent removal or reduction of the discomfort or pain that they are feeling in their lives due to the suppressed or distracted emotions. So again, we have that trauma at stage 3, that's very painful. We cover it up with a mask, and it is the mask that that person thinks is giving them that relief. But really it's not, it's the distraction that the mask provides. And back to that phrase that I heard once before, the mind does not recognize the drug, the mind recognizes the feeling. And this is why people can go from one addiction to the next, to the next, to the next. So we could, for example, have one person who is a smoker, and then they stop smoking. So then they start drinking because they haven't got the smoking. And then they start to notice they drink alcohol too much, so they give up the drinking. Now they've given up smoking and they've given up drinking. But then they start to notice that they're eating a lot of junk food. So they go on a big health kick. They give up smoking, they give up drinking, they give up junk food, and then start working 80 hours a week. Remember, masks are painkillers. If the protector self is looking for a mask to cover up a deeper trauma from stage 3, it is not necessarily the individual mask, such as smoking or such as drinking alcohol. It is that the protector self is looking for something to cover up the deeper pain. And to the protector self, whether that's smoking or drinking or exercising 7 days a week, 4 hours a day, or working 80 hours a week, or being obsessed by, say, social media, the protector self won't care. It's just looking for something to cover up that deeper pain. And this is why so many people can struggle breaking the cycle of addiction, because they get caught up in the trick that it's smoking that I need to give up. It's drinking that I need to give up. But as you can see now, it's not that. The smoking, the drinking, the working 80-hour weeks is a mask to cover up a deeper pain. Remove the deeper pain and the mask will no longer be there. Okay, so in a moment we're going to go through 3 examples of people that can get caught up in their mask and the con, and then think they are addicted to their mask. But as we've been going all the way through in this program, there's always a level deeper. So here we're going to start to look at deeper than their mask of what the person is actually addicted to. Remember, addictions are painkillers. Masks are painkillers. Okay, so we are now going to take this a level deeper, because that's what each of these modules is about. A progressive unfoldment of very sensitive areas. So obviously in the last module we looked at what could be a mask and the con, and discovered that basically anything could be a mask, and that's how emotionally manipulative behaviour can hide in plain sight, and the sugar and salt. But here obviously we're going to be looking at addictions, and as we said, addictions are painkillers, and also masks are painkillers. But we also need to separate that out a little bit, because it's not exactly the mask that the person wants. It's the feeling of the removal of pain that the mask provides, or they think it provides. And this again is why the mind can jump from one addiction to another, to another, to another. It's not necessarily the mask it's looking for. It is the removal of pain that they think that mask gives them. Now also something I wanted to add in here before we progress, because this is a very important area around addictions, that if you have any addictions in your life right now, whether it's working long hours or fitness or food or alcohol or whatever it may be, if you have any addictions, it is absolutely vital that you take it step by step. Because the one thing that we have to recognize, and this is vital, is that an addiction is there for a reason. It's protecting something deeper. And if a sudden change was to be made, it can sometimes throw the mind or even the body into total disarray and end up causing more pain, either emotionally or physically, than if the addiction was to have been left in place. Now, I want to share something with you here. When my dad was heavily drinking, and he was drinking whiskey and vodka, and then during that time we actually had a house fire, which was obviously a very painful thing to experience for the family. And then my dad stopped drinking suddenly, and as a result of that he started having seizures. I remember being 12 years old and seeing my dad having a full-blown seizure. Now at the time we didn't know what had caused that, but upon further investigation it was actually suddenly stopping drinking that had caused the seizures. And obviously it can be the same with lots of other things like SSRIs or antidepressants or sugar or working long hours. You have to keep in mind at all times, if an addiction is there, it may have been there for a long time without you consciously realizing it. And a sudden change might cause quite a backlash, which you then have to deal with. Now, for example, in the UK, there was something called Dry January, of which people then would stop drinking alcohol for the whole of January. But imagine if my dad had done that. My dad was heavily codependent and he was a functioning alcoholic. When he suddenly stopped drinking because we had the house fire, he started having seizures. So I'm going to share something now about the mass market personal development and the quick fix gurus, and I'm going to be very direct about this. And in all honesty, this is probably the most direct you're going to hear me be around this particular topic with the mass market personal development and the quick fix gurus. Because on social media, we can see these people jump on camera and they will say, give up your addictions, go clear for 30 days, I believe in you, and you're stronger than you think, blah, blah, blah. And I mean blah, 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 as in that is extremely unprofessional and very dangerous. To give that advice of just go cold turkey, that person will have no idea what that person may be addicted to, what their lifestyle might be like, what their past history of trauma may have been like. But again, it's obviously your choice and your life. But the one thing I would say is that if you are going to work through any form of addiction, take it step by step. Sudden changes can throw the body and mind into a total disarray. And it might sound great, giving everything up and going cold turkey, but on the other hand, you also will then have to deal with the backlash that comes as a result of going cold turkey. Keep that phrase in mind, as I said earlier in the program. Jumping into anything with guns blazing will not get anybody anywhere. Okay, so let's go into these 3 examples of people that can get caught up in the con, and then we can look deeper at their addiction and the removal of pain for them. So firstly, we have person A. Now, person A feels inside themselves that they are not desired or wanted by their peers or friends. However, the external reality is that they have a whole array of friends and they are a member of several social groups. Their mask, however, is that they constantly resort to checking emails or social networking sites for that external validation. As we now know, they are doing that to reassure themselves that people do want to speak to them and are thinking about them. Now, they do this checking so often that it starts to affect their work life. One day, their manager has a meeting with them and explains that if they keep checking their social media sites and emails during work time, they're going to lose their job. Now, to this person, the underlying pain of not being wanted, stage 3 of the self-esteem recovery model, is more horrifying and traumatizing to them than losing their job. So, they keep going online. Needless to say, they eventually lose their job. Their perceived addiction was going online to check if anybody had contacted them. That is the mask that we can observe. We could say that person's mask is that they're going online to check emails and messages. But now let's go deeper. If they receive an email or a message, they think they feel elated and connected. That's the distraction. They assume that it was the email or the message that caused that feel-good factor. But in reality, it was their perception of being wanted because they received the email. And it was that caused them the reaction of gratification. So here we can see it wasn't the email, it wasn't the messages, it was the perception that they got the email or the message that now they think they feel valued. For this person, the suppressed emotion was that they feel they are not wanted or seen as valuable. That's the underlying trauma. If they can continually see that people message them, they can then trick themselves, distract themselves into believing that people do like them. So this is now external validation. They're not internally validating because that center circle, I am not good enough. So they have to externally validate themselves. I get message after message after message. Eventually though, as the underlying emotion has not been resolved, that trauma at stage 3, the anxiety of not being wanted comes back. So they check a message, they feel good for a few minutes, and then they have to check that message again. Now, using this method to reduce their low self-esteem, given that it's external validation, not internal validation, will only ever create a pain-based loop. because in reality they are not facing the underlying issue, but in essence masking it. I don't feel good in who I am, so if I get a message, I believe people like me. But as we can see now, their real addiction, deep down underneath everything, was the gratification that they felt from their own physiology. They get the message, maybe for example serotonin and dopamine is being released into their body because of the perception that they received a message. So here, underneath all of that, is that they themselves have created the emotional high by believing they are wanted because they received a message from somebody. So here we can see it wasn't the email or the message that gave them that high. It was their perception of receiving that email. So the question here would be, was that person addicted to going online? Was that person addicted to checking social media websites? And the answer is no. What they were addicted to was that feel-good factor that they created themselves from their perception of receiving an email or a message. So next we have person B. Person B is continually anxious of appearing as a lazy person to their peers because they were always told when they were young that they were idle or lazy or a procrastinator. But now they're an adult and they end up working 60 to 80 hours a week. They do this, very often subconsciously, to prove to other people that they are highly motivated and a very trustworthy person. So you can see that's a mask to prove I am not that, I'm the opposite. However, they know underneath that working like this will eventually destroy their marriage, and they're going through a lot of challenging times in their marriage because of the long hours. But subconsciously, they feel too trapped in anxiety to work less hours. So to them it could be, if I work less hours, I'm going to be seen as lazy, but because all of that could be suppressed in Pandora's box, they feel anxious about working less hours. Eventually, 2 years into their training management position, their manager says that if they keep working in this manner, there will be a big promotion in a year. So, they continue to work in this manner, 60 to 80 hours a week, and eventually their marriage falls apart. Yes, they get that promotion and a big pay rise, but just in time to pay for their divorce. So now let me ask you a question. What exactly is their addiction? Looking at it just on a surface level, we could think that the addiction is their job role, working 60 to 80 hours, but it's not. The addiction is not the job, or the continual reassurance that their manager gives them. Their addiction is the gratification that they feel by being able to reassure themselves that they are not the idle, lazy person that they were judged as when they were young. And because of the long hours and seeing themselves that they are not an idle person, they then believe that they're not going to be rejected. And lastly, let's look at person C. Person C begins a new romantic relationship and is very happy, and the feelings of love are beginning to grow. Yet inside, they always have had this deep insecurity that people are going to leave them. Now this was formed because when they were young, they watched their most loved parent go to prison when they were too young to understand why. So to them as a child, their parent just went away. And this created a deep abandonment issue for that person. One evening, person C's new partner lets them know that they are going out by themselves that evening because it's a private function for old school friends. This causes a deep emotional backlash within person C, and they are now sat at home all alone. Whilst they sit there, they start to notice that their internal paranoia gets out of hand, and anxiety thoughts are flowing around their mind at rapid pace. But with that paranoia on their internal cinema screen, they start to imagine with anxiety that their partner who is out with all their girlfriends is now talking about them in a very derogatory way. They start to assume within their mind that their partner is having much more fun without them, and they also, in their paranoia, start imagining that their partner is going off with other people and having an affair. Their mask then becomes one of aggression and control, which is intimidation or fight. To calm their pain, they ring their partner several times throughout the night and then start to demand, going into the control and intimidation tactic, they start to demand to know where they are and exactly what they are doing. They do this continually all the way through the evening, disrupting their partner's school reunion. When they're on the phone to their partner, they tell or shout at their partner that they want to know where they are and what they are doing because they, quote, love them. But as we all know, the word love can very often be misquoted. The partner on the night out then starts to feel very controlled, trapped and smothered. When the partner's friends hear all about this behaviour, they start to define person C's behaviour as controlling. And then that has the effect of causing an argument in the social group because the partner is trying to defend person C, as in their new romantic partner. In this case, with what I've just explained there, although it would appear that person C is addicted to their romantic partner, they are not actually addicted to the romantic partner at all. Their addiction is the feeling of gratification that they feel reassured when they think their partner is thinking of them and talking to them rather than talking to somebody else. Because remember, their deeper trauma is abandonment. So even though when they are ringing their partner several times through the night and they are demanding to know every single detail of their night, it causes a heated debate or even an argument on the phone. And then also their partner has arguments between their friends. But even though all that is going on, all that chaos and all that drama, underneath all of that, even though person C might consciously feel very guilty about their behaviour, underneath all of that, they actually feel emotionally reassured that they can hear their partner's voice. And sometimes, if you've ever experienced this yourself or seen it in other people, sometimes a person with abandonment issues would rather be in an argument than have no contact at all. And if you recall in an earlier module where I explained, if I was my true self and I did my best, I barely got any attention from my dad. But if I was helpless and I struggled or I cried, then I would get shouted at. To me, in my young mind, being shouted at was connection. So I would stay my conditioned self because it meant I got something. So just to finally wrap that part up about person C, just to keep in mind that sometimes people in life could believe the only way that they can get connection with other people is through arguments or drama or chaos. And although they don't necessarily want to cause that chaos because consciously they might feel very guilty about it, their underlying core programming might say different. But bringing all those three examples to a close, I just want you to keep in mind at all times, people are not addicted to their actions or their behaviours or things. They are addicted to the feeling that having that mask gives them. Which again means addictions are painkillers. And underneath that, the reason I've said all of that is because if, for example, we were taught that we are addicted to, for example, smoking. If a person was to think they are addicted to smoking, then the removal of smoking will cause them pain. But if we were to then look at the underlying pain relief that that person feels from smoking, and then we can alleviate that pain, then the smoking, which is a mask, would have no need to be there. And that is how a person can move on from addictions. But again, that said, and this is a very important part, that sometimes people who are addicted to certain things or substances or alcohol, suddenly changing them could have a backlash on the physical body. So if you are going to work with somebody around addictions, make sure that they definitely know what they're talking about and have training in that area. This is definitely not something that you should ever work with a quick fix guru about. Being all gung-ho about giving up addictions at this stage could be very dangerous. You have now reached the end of Module 14, Part number 1. To continue, please go to Module 14, Part number 2.